54. Dear Kiddo, take my hand into darkness. Mom announces her pregnancy early in the morning. I took the long drive back to help her, about 7 hours. And let me tell you, I shook my head so much during that trip that I nearly gave myself whiplash. By the time I pulled up to the hotel where I was staying, I had diagnosed myself with a severe case of existential confusion, which, as it turns out, cannot be treated with aspirin. I dragged my sorry self into my room at the back of the hotel, collapsed onto the bed, and stared at the ceiling like it had all the answers. Spoiler alert, it did not. Over the next 4 or 5 days, I became the reigning champion of the doing absolutely nothing but ruminating Olympics. The event consisted of replaying the last few years in my head, realizing that my life had been a tragic sitcom, and coming to terms with the fact that my mother was less of a mother and more of an emotional Bond villain. Mom wasn't just your average, overbearing, passive-aggressive mother. Oh no, she was next level. She wasn't just complicated. She was a Rubik's Cube, wrapped in an enigma, dipped in manipulation sauce. I didn't have the vocabulary for it at the time, but if someone had handed me a dictionary and a therapist, I would have landed on covert narcissist or sociopath in no time. It took years before I learned those words, but that didn't stop me from knowing something was very, very wrong. Even before I had the professional terminology, I had the gut feeling, which, frankly, is often more reliable than a PhD in psychology. Later, I would come to find out that all of her ex-husbands had reached the same conclusion. It was a pattern. Craig, her third husband, cheated on. Her second husband, also cheated on. Her first husband, my father, well, he ran for the hills before he even had time to process the wreckage. At this point, if her past relationships had been a movie, the tagline would be "Run now, ask questions later." Mom had a superpower, turning reality into an elaborate maze of contradictions, gaslighting, and outright absurdity. She was like a magician, except instead of pulling rabbits out of a hat, she pulled lies out of thin air, and then convinced you that you had imagined everything else. She had a special way of making you question your sanity, while somehow making herself the victim in every situation. It was like emotional inception, and I was stuck in the bottom layer of the dream. But after 5 long days of staring at my ceiling and consuming an unhealthy amount of room service fries, I finally found the strength to do the unthinkable, cut her out of my life. It hurt. It was like amputating a limb, if the limb was toxic and whispered guilt trips in your ear at every opportunity. But I was ready. I had mentally crafted my farewell speech, complete with dramatic pauses and possibly some background music. And that's when my phone rang. I looked at the screen, and of course, it was her. I ignored it. I was strong. I was resolute. I had boundaries. Then it rang again, and again, and again. By the 4th call, I picked up, mostly because she was going to outlast my patience, and I valued my sleep more than my principles at that moment. The moment I answered, I knew. Call it intuition. Call it years of emotional whiplash training. But I knew exactly why she was calling with such urgency. She was pregnant, and lo and behold, I was right. She took a pregnancy test and boom, there you were. A plus sign on a little stick, announcing yourself into my world. I was shaken. I was disturbed. But I was also happy, because despite everything, despite the chaos and the dysfunction and the fact that I had just decided to reclaim my life, this was something we had talked about for years. This was something I had wanted. And just like that, my world turned upside down again. But hey, at least I wasn't staring at the ceiling anymore.